The group I was assigned was reptiles. The distinguishing characteristics of reptiles is that they are vertebrates, which means they have a backbone, and they were actually the first animal with a backbone to adapt to dry land living. They are tetrapods, which means they are four-legged vertebrates, and they have three chambered hearts usually. There are some species that have more, and we'll talk about that later. They are ectothermic or cold-blooded, which means they can't regulate their own body temperature, which is why a lot of times you'll see lizards on rocks basking in the sun, because that's how they get their warmth. They also have extremely tough and scaly skin, and they may have waterproof eggs, and those two things are what allowed them to move away from living in water and adapt better to land. They also produce both live young and eggs depending on the species. For the taxonomy, reptiles are in the Reptilia family, which stems from the Latin word rapere, which means to creep. They are all amniotes, and traditionally, reptiles were classified by their physical features, but molecular studies have suggested that classifying reptiles by their evolutionary relationship is more accurate because there's now evidence that birds actually stem from some of the same reptilian ancestors as today's reptiles. So reptiles are in the Eukarya domain, they're in the animal kingdom, they're in the chordate phylum, and of course they're in the Reptilia class. So there's four orders of Reptilia. There's the Crocodilia, the Sphenodontia, the Squamata, and the Testudines. Within each order, there's lots of families. Like in the Crocodilia order, there's 3 different subfamilies, and we'll learn about that later, but I wanted to discuss that as you branch down the evolutionary tree, each set gets larger, and I gave an example of this for turtles. So you start as the class Reptilia, and once you get down to Genesis, it continues to branch out and get more broad. There's 5 important subgroups we're going to talk about today, which are turtles and tortoises, lizards, snakes, alligators and crocodiles, and dinosaurs. So the first group we're going to talk about is turtles and tortoises, and they are in the order of Testudines. So what's significant about turtles and tortoises is that they have a hard protective shell, which no other species has. The next thing is that all turtles and tortoises lay eggs. So there's 3 different turtles and tortoises that I picked to talk about, which is land tortoises, and they have stubby legs and claws because they walk on land, they don't swim in water. And then you have sea-dwelling turtles, which have flat legs, kind of like flippers, because they do swim in the water and live in the water. And then you have freshwater and coastal species, and their legs serve both purposes of land and swimming. The next group we're going to talk about is lizards, and they're in the order of Squamata. They have really long legs and tails, and with that, some species can actually shed their tails when they feel endangered and grow it back. And then also, if they feel in danger, some species can change colors. Lizards also give birth to both live young and eggs, depending on the species. Lizards also make up over half the world's reptile population, with about 3,500 different species of lizards. The next group we're going to talk about is snakes, which are also part of the Squamata order. They are significant because they're islands, they can't move their eyelids, and they have extremely poor vision. They also have no external ear openings or legs. They have no legs. They also have an extremely flexible jaw, which they use to swallow their prey whole, or some species are poisonous, which is another way that they get prey. The next family we're going to talk about is the crocodiles and alligators in the order of Crocodilla. As I mentioned before, there's 3 subfamilies within the Crocodilla order. They are the Crocodiliinae, which is tropical crocodiles, and they're distinguished by having a relatively pointed snout. The Alligatorinae, which is alligators and caimans, and their snout is more blunt. And then the Gavialinae, which is the gavial and the ganario, and their snout is beak-like. So what's significant about crocodiles and alligators is that they are the largest living reptile. They also have more armor-type scales, and they're all carnivores. They also are a species that tends to take care of their offspring for a much longer time period than other species after they're born. They also regrow or replace their teeth throughout their lives, and their brains are much more developed, and they are much more intelligent than other species. Another major significant difference is that they have 4 chambered hearts. Usually species of reptiles only have 3 chambered hearts, but alligators and crocodiles are significant for having 4 chambered hearts. The final subgroup is dinosaurs. So they are significant because they are drastically different in their structures compared to today's reptiles. Dinosaurs have a more upright posture, and their legs are underneath them like humans, rather than today's reptiles whose legs are on the sides. They, like a turtle, has its legs come out of the sides of its shell, and lizards have their legs on the side. Dinosaurs also have really strong and flexible jaws. They have 2 holes inside of the back of their eye sockets in which the jaw muscles go back and attach to the top of their heads. And that allows them to have a more broad jaw opening. Let's talk about the evolutionary history. So as I mentioned before, all reptiles are amniotes. The earliest amniotes evolved from about 350 million years ago, and they resembled small lizards, but they were not reptiles yet. Their amniotic eggs allowed them to move away from bodies of water and become larger. Around 320 million years ago, 2 groups branched off from the amniotes, and they were the synapsids and the therapsids. The therapsids were the reptiles, the dinosaurs, and the birds. The synapsids, however, were more prevalent until the Jurassic takeover, which is when the dinosaurs really evolved and took over. And at the end of the Mosaic era, there was another mass extinction, which killed off all the dinosaurs and a large amount of reptiles. And the ones that were left after that extinction are evolved into the reptiles we know today. The ecological significance. So reptiles are really important to the food chain because they're both predators and prey. Alligators are only carnivores, and they're the largest reptiles. Reptiles that are the largest reptiles are always the top predators in their ecosystems. But like I said, they're also prey, and they help with pollination. So an example of this is herbivorous reptiles help with dispersing seeds and pollinating plants. Specifically, the blue-tailed day gecko is now the only pollinator for the rare plant Trotia blackburnia on the island of Mauritius. Along with them being the largest predator in their ecosystems, they also help to regulate things. For example, some species help control the number of serious agricultural pests by consuming rodents and insect pests. Reptiles as I mentioned before, reptiles are ectothermic, so they need a place where they can get warmth. So you can find reptiles relatively anywhere as long as it's warm. They're found on every continent except for Antarctica, and they live in places like terrestrials, freshwater, or marine habitats. Topics of interest. So something significant about reptiles is that a study on lizards determined that if global temperatures continue to increase, 20% of the world's lizard species will become extinct. Reptiles have also been used as symbols in culture and religion and media, such as the example I have on the slide. This is a symbol from the movie Harry Potter. So they use a snake, and it's really popular. The next thing is that snakes are used for both food and kept as a pet. my activity is turtle races. So I begin this lesson by reading a book about turtles and then doing a class labeling discussion where we would label the parts of a turtle. And then it would end with an activity where students get to create a turtle using different materials such as shells, sticks, glitter, a bunch of different options. They get to create the turtle, and they would attach a piece of string to their creation, and then they would get to race it on a racetrack. And that's my works cited.